I'm not sure if this is going to work, actually. I've never used this before, so I sincerely hope that it is. That was the 50 of the best pounds I've ever spent, giving that to John Troop. I tend to get asked when I do these sorts of things about classic areas. One is foreign reporting, because I've done a little bit of foreign reporting. I know some of you here are interested in doing that ultimately. And sports reporting. I did the World Cup in Brazil, which I'm going to chat about a little bit shortly. Buy-ups, because that's a classic kind of tabloid area of expertise, if one can put it that way. Buying stories. I did one of these talks for an audience of international journalists, and it was really comedic. The students from India just didn't understand the concept of paying for a story. It was really, really funny. And I kept getting this guy asking me, so do people not just make things up? And do you just pay them for stories? Like, you know, and I had to explain to him that obviously you do have to check things and you do have to make sure that they're true. And you don't just meet someone in the street and say, have you got a story and there's 1,500 quid, thanks very much. I think they felt that was a danger, and obviously there is a danger in buy-ups, which is why I'll talk a little bit about how you evaluate a story, how you work out what a story's worth. There's a buy-up which I was involved with, which cost a sum not unadjacent to £80,000 quite a long time ago, which was a sports story. It had some comedic elements to it, so I'll talk a little bit about that. I know Nigel was particularly keen on me to talk a little bit about social media and what it's like doing a big event like the World Cup, and the kind of the decisions you have to make with regard to Twitter, with regard to Facebook, with regard to all those sorts of decisions online, primarily for me. When you're on a big job, how do you know to keep the story for tomorrow for the newspaper, and how do you know when to put it onto Twitter, when to put it onto social media, when to put it onto the website, which is obviously a major issue now. Our website got 1 million hits in January, or unique views they call it now, and it's a massive, massive issue for me as a reporter as to what you do in World Cups. So I'm going to give you some practical examples. I welcome questions, by the way. There are some questions which obviously for legal reasons it's going to be a little bit awkward to answer, but if you have any question whatsoever about anything that I say, by all means put your hand up and ask questions as I go along. At the end, I don't mind either way. When I was doing the World Cup in Brazil, there was an incident in which Ross Barkley, who plays for Everton, he's very young, he's only a teenager, had missed the bus and he had to run after the team bus, which was obviously a very funny story. It was a very funny story on a myriad of different levels. One is he was literally running after the bus, having missed it because he slept in. And the fact that Roy Hodgson hadn't noticed that one of his team had missed the bus was quite funny. But the footage of that was quite important. I was at one end of the job. I was at the training ground where the team, logistics of going through Rio was quite difficult, so we had to have someone at the hotel in case there was a terrorist attack, in case somebody tried to shoot one of the players, in case there was a fire, in case something happens in that situation. And then I'm at the other end at the training ground waiting for the team, waiting for the press conference, waiting to see them in action, waiting to see if anyone is injured. And so I found out about the Ross Barkley story sort of after the event, if one can put it that way. I wasn't actually there stood watching the bus, which several people were. I was discussing with the chief reporter about Ross Barkley missing the bus and how funny that was, and kind of the ins and outs of the story and the sorts of issues which I'm just about to discuss now. Do we put it online straight away, which is what we did? Have I got footage of him running away from the bus? When there was a guy next to me from a Brazilian newspaper who said, oh, I've got video footage of Ross Barkley, would you like it? So, you know, kind of manna from heaven, basically. And I said, yes, that would be most generous, thank you very much. And we got about, I can't remember how much it was about 30 seconds of him running after the bus. It was very funny because of his age, because of the fact they hadn't realised. It was probably, you know, honestly, 20 seconds of footage. We put that online and it got 45,000 hits in the first 3 hours. And I tell that story because that is like so crucial to websites. And so much of what you have to decide about now is about moving images, not necessarily about pictures. When I first started in the job, you'd go and interview somebody, you'd take a picture of them. It was a fairly straightforward job. You didn't have to analyse too much about where that was going to go, which platform it was going to be used on. These days you have to decide that so rapidly. You're all sat now probably contemplating about Twitter, quite often looking at Facebook, doing 3 or 4 different things at the same time, and that obviously that does feed into your journalism to a certain extent, in fact to a large extent now. How many of you in the audience today bought a newspaper? There you go. How many of you are interested in becoming journalists? Et voila. There is the case in point. I was doing one of these talks for science graduates up in Glasgow, and I got a question about why aren't any science correspondents on newspapers anymore? And of course, the very simple answer to that question is that people aren't buying enough newspapers, and newspapers are being cut. And the dilemma for everybody in this room is to how you make that work. Because for all there are 1 million hits on our website, the income from the website unfortunately accounts for about 4% of our results, 4% of the income overall. So it's very, very difficult to make journalism work in simple terms if all you're doing is doing it online. And that's the big, big dilemma for all of you in this room, really. How many of you would like to work on newspapers? And how many of you see yourselves more likely in social media in a context of working on a website? And that's what you'd prefer to do, presumably, is it? It's a very, very difficult judgment to make. And it's a bit easier when you go to things like World Cups, because obviously the entire world is there to a certain extent. And you know that when, in terms of the media that is, you know that there's going to be a myriad of different outlets who are watching the team bus for the same reasons we were there. And you know that there's going to be like 200 pairs of eyes watching Ross Barkley run after the bus. And you know there's going to be video footage which is going to appear on websites very, very quickly. What's more difficult is to decide what goes for the newspaper and what stays, what has to go out immediately. And that is a real dilemma. I went to do the trial of Josef Fritzl. I don't know if you remember, he's the guy who kept his family buried in a cellar in Austria for quite some considerable time. It's probably a little bit before your time to a certain extent. It's about 5 or 6 years ago now, but it was a massive, massive story from this tiny little place in Austria. And essentially, he had 3 kids from an incestuous relationship, and he kept them as prisoners in his cellar for over 20 years. Somewhat ironically, Austria being Austria, because of the protection of personal rights in Austria and the privacy laws, he wasn't discovered. He actually had an earth mover in his back garden and extended the house downwards in order to create more room for his secret family downstairs. And none of the neighbours asked, and the council didn't ask, as to why he was building a massive cellar in order to house his children. I went to do the trial of Josef Fritzl in Austria because I did German when I was at university, when I was in your position. And the world and his wife were at this place, at this courtroom. And there was a long, long list to try and get inside to cover the trial. And there was an American anchor. I was on the list, I was number 13, there were 12 who could get into the courtroom, and there was an American anchor who decided that he'd rather be in front of the court because it was all in German, which I suppose is a reasonable argument, than actually be inside the court. So I became one of the 12 people who actually got inside the court. What I found extraordinary about that, and one of the things I want to raise with you, because I think it is so important to remember this, is that when Fritzl walked into this courtroom, and you've got to bear in mind this was a massive worldwide case, and again, everybody wanted to see what happened to him. Everybody felt very strongly he should see justice. He put a file on top of his head, so it was like pure theatre really when he walked in. And there was also this thing about having got away with it for such a long time, because he got away with it for almost a quarter of a century. There was about that moment of finally seeing justice. So I felt really privileged to actually be in the courtroom and to see it happen and to witness it. And I think one of the things, if you do take anything from this, one of the things I would like to stress to you is that in the days of observing things through a phone, and observing things obviously at a distance, and constantly filming yourself in order to see yourself experiencing that, you can't really replace being there. That's your primary role as a journalist. And what I found extraordinary about the guy who wanted to stand in front of the building rather than be inside the building is that he missed that. He missed the drama of actually witnessing it. And I think it's very, very important for all of you to realise that you can do things from a distance, and you can pilfer things from websites, from Facebook, from the myriad of different sources that are out there, but you can't really replace actually being there and just simply being a witness. because ultimately bearing witness to any major event, anything which is newsworthy, is the very quintessence of your role as a journalist. And if you lose sight of that, and you're constantly online just simply nicking stuff from other sources, unfortunately, in my opinion at least, you're going to miss out on the most important aspect of the job, which is simply to bear witness to events which you cover. The other thing about it was, because he'd actually kept these kids imprisoned for more than 20 years, they got some evidence bags out. And the way I wrote the story in the end was about the evidence bags, because when they opened the evidence bags in court, you could actually smell, you know, like the sort of the dampness that you get when something's being left in the open air, for example, when you go camping or something of that nature. Difficult to describe the smell, but because they'd taken the evidence directly from the cellar, and it was in a bag, when they pulled it out of the bag, you could smell what they'd lived in. These kids had lived without seeing light, without seeing the sunshine, without being able to raise their heads properly. One of them had curvature of the spine because he'd literally grown up in a cellar. So actually being in the courtroom and smelling the environment in which they lived, realising they'd been in prison for 25 years, realising one of them hadn't seen sunshine and grown up in those conditions, realising one of them had curvature of the spine because the cellar was so, the ceiling on the cellar was so low, realising that this tiny little bloke who was so ashamed he couldn't show his face when he actually came into court and had to hide it with a file when he walked into court like some sort of bizarre king in his court. That was a really important aspect of the job. That was a really crucial part of the job. And what I wrote about was actually the fact that you could smell the imprisonment. You could smell the conditions in which they'd been kept. You could actually sense it and feel it in the courtroom. And you don't get that unless you're there, really. You don't get that unless you actually witness it. And I think it's really important in these days of modern media and social media that you don't lose that really important thing. Also, as Nigel was saying about having a personal relationship with people to a certain extent and getting them to trust you, when you interview them, that is the most important aspect of doing a simple one-on-one. I mean, to go from the courtroom and the world's media looking at this awful case of the killer, and the awful case of the kidnapper rather, and the man who locked his own family in a cellar for however many years. When you arrive on somebody's doorstep, and I had to go around various doors in Austria talking to his relatives, which is a really bizarre experience because you sort of, I was speaking German and the Austrian accent's a bit of a challenge, and obviously my Geordie accent didn't help too much. You've got to engage with people. I had to try and get them to speak to me in German at the same time as recording them and then translating it and trying to make a note of what they were saying. But the same rules apply. I finally got to a son-in-law who told me that they went there for Christmas, and he felt really guilty because he used to dance and sing and have a Christmas party above this cellar. So he now realised that while he was dancing and singing and getting drunk, as everybody does at Christmas, or many people do, there were these kids locked in a cellar downstairs for 25 years while he was celebrating, because he was married to one of the other siblings of the secret family downstairs. And again, you know, when you engage with somebody on a doorstep, what you're asking them to do is trust you really as a journalist. And whether you're speaking German or English or French or whatever the language is, whatever you're doing, you have to try and get them to really, you know, to buy into what you're doing to a large extent, and buy into what you're asking them and get them to trust you. That, as Nigel said, that you're going to give an honest and vivid account of what they've done and what they've said. One of the best, and to continue that theme of witnessing things, one of the best parts of the job, one of the greatest parts of the job, one of the greatest privileges, it's a very simplistic thing in sporting terms, is simply to be there, really. Is simply to be there. One of the best things I've ever witnessed live was at the 100 metres final at the Beijing Olympics, where there was a crowd of 90,000 people waiting for Usain Bolt to start the 100 metres. And I don't know if you remember it, but all of the other competitors were like this, kind of in the zone, game, and the lane next to him in particular. And Usain Bolt was kind of doing this and doing a little bit of a dance at the front, and he was tapping this little Chinese guy on the shoulder and going, because they had a guy who had to take his trainers away, this little tiny little Chinese guy, who, to be honest with you, didn't really know what to do in those circumstances. He didn't know whether to laugh or take part or whatever. And I just found it absolutely extraordinary that somebody under that kind of pressure could be having a dance and a jig with literally, you know, the world's population watching him, about to become the fastest man on the planet. But you know the best thing about it? The best thing about it was the silence just as the gun came down. So there's 90,000 people in the bird's nest, and it's dark, and he's there having done this dance, but then the serious business kind of is just about to happen, and you're there waiting for it to happen, and you're there waiting for the gun to go off. In just those seconds leading up to the gun going off, just realizing that you're there and it's completely silent, and you're about to watch the fastest man on the planet, it's just the best thrill. I can't begin to describe it, really. I can't begin to describe how it feels being there. And the London Olympics was exactly the same. The London Olympics, I really did genuinely feel a privilege to be present in much of what I witnessed on the you know, at the games, because of the build-up to it, because of the British thing about it being built up to, you know, to fail miserably, and of course it being a tremendous success. That was one part of it. But the other aspect of it was just being a part of something that was so brilliant in very simple terms. The night that all the medals were won, I was there, and I think there were 6 gold medals won, and I managed to get to 4 of them. I love, personally, this is just my personal kind of favourite, if you like. I love the cycling. I love watching the cycling. I love the kind of the close-up intensity of it when you're there in the middle of the there's got like a bear pit in the middle where you watch them going round, and they're like gladiatorial, you know, racing against each other. And also when you see them, I mean, obviously sometimes they're doing 35 miles an hour. It's absolutely incredible to see the speed, to see them going round. You know, it's just, it's a brilliant feeling to actually just see somebody being that good at something close up, really. And I got to meet Bradley Wiggins, who was an old-time hero, just after he'd won his gold medal. And one of the funniest things from London 2012, which will stay with me until I die, was Bradley Wiggins doing this. With his, he had it sort of zipped, he had a zip top on, so it was zipped down, and he's got the tattoo of his kids. He's got his names, the names of his children tattooed on his heart. So you could just see them underneath the gold medal, and Bradley Wiggins doing that. I mean, must be the coolest bloke alive, just about. Got to be, I would have thought. It's a tight race, I know. It's a very competitive field, that. But to see him just after he'd done that, to see him just after he'd won his gold medal, made history. He was at that stage the Tour de France winner. And bizarrely, they had this tradition for that particular race, having gone through the streets of London, to actually put him on a throne in front of Hampton Court, you know, with the sunshine behind him, and that was really funny. And he actually, of all the sporting people who I've met and interviewed, fair enough, I was in a room. I spoke to him one-on-one very, very briefly to congratulate him and just speak to him for literally 2 minutes. But he is a brilliant interviewee as well, because he's so confident in his own skin. He just tells you straight about anything. You can ask him about drugs. You can ask him about his personal aims. You can ask him pretty much anything. He gives you a straight answer, which is a rare quality indeed these days, because many interviewees can be particularly anodyne, particularly in the sporting context, because they're rather worried about saying something controversial, whereas he's the complete opposite. He just tells you what he thinks almost immediately without thinking about it, because he's so confident, really. Any questions raised? Anything you want to ask?
Jeremy, you mentioned the 80 grand buyer.
Yeah, it's a long time ago now, so it's a bit of a history lesson, unfortunately, for you people, but there was a European Championship in England in '96, which was the first tournament since the World Cup had been on these shores in '66. And it's bizarre the way these things come out, but there was a magazine interview with a guy called Helmut Haller, who played for Germany against England in '66. Had basically, at the final whistle, Geoff Hurst, for those who don't know, I'll give a very brief recount, as it were, but Geoff Hurst scores the winning goal. They think it's all over. It is now. Very famous commentary. The most iconic moment in English sport, really. England finally win the World Cup. They've just made it 4-2. The ball bounces in the back of the net. Helmut Haller, this little German, went well, depending on how you view it, stole the ball or took the ball as a memento. So he had Jeff Hurst's ball in his hand. And of course, everybody runs on the pitch. You know, there's absolute chaos, as one would imagine, having just won the World Cup. And meanwhile, Helmut Haller sort of puts the ball under his arm and disappears from Wembley with Jeff Hurst's ball, which was obviously a crime against the nation as far as we were concerned. And it didn't emerge until 30 years later. And it just coincided with he did a magazine interview in which he said, oh, I've got Jeff Hurst's ball, I've had it for 30 years, I gave it to my son, he was only 7 at the time, in 66 or whatever, he's kept it as a memento and it's in the loft. Because, as I mentioned, because I speak German, I got the job of ringing him up to try and sort out a deal with him. But we'd already decided that we're going to just steal the ball. Because obviously he had it and it didn't belong to him, so we would take it back for the nation. So we decided that we would just offer him anything. So it was before the Euro, it was still Deutschmark, so I was told to offer him anything that was going to guarantee getting the ball. And initially when I spoke to him, he was actually very friendly, very helpful. I said, can we borrow the ball for a picture? Obviously with the intent of then stealing it. He said, yeah, no, I don't think that'll be a problem. I'll ask my son, see what we can do. If you could just pay me something for borrowing it, as long as I get it back. So we then went from there to the son arriving on his doorstep, offering him a large sum of money, me being told I had to offer him anything to get the ball, offering £80,000 for a pig's bladder, which was 30 years old at that stage and had been sat in a loft for 30 years. And get it at all costs. That was the instruction, but the instruction had also gone out to the Sun. The Sun's editor, coincidentally, the interview appeared on the Monday, the Sun's editor was 40 on the Friday. It was his 40th birthday party, and he'd said to a reporting team, and they sent about 12 reporters and photographers to Munich, you've got to get this at all costs. I want it for my birthday party, and I'm going to give it to Jeff Hurst at my birthday party, which is sometimes how, you know, personal ambition, if one can put it that way, from an editor, a personal desire becomes translated into the, you know, the troops on the ground. For whatever reason, maybe because of the German, maybe because of the fact I could speak to him in German, he decided he was going to go with us. We had offered £80,000, but he was very, very astute. He was kind of a bit of a forerunner in the sense that he didn't just play in Germany, he played in Italy, he was quite cosmopolitan. Some very, very funny things happened during the course of the battle to get the ball, which he told me about and I heard about because I knew a couple of people who worked for the Sun. The funniest thing, I think, was the guy from the Sun who got sent to Berlin instead of Munich in order to get the ball, because they thought this guy was in Berlin. And he got to Berlin and he rang up, and it was about 10 o'clock in the evening, and I'm sure you're aware of the geography of it, but it's about 700 miles from Berlin to Munich, and the news editor just said to him, oh, you'll just have to go to Munich then, you better hire a car. So he had to hire a car and drive for, like, I think it took about 9 or 10 hours, and he arrived at Helmut Haller's house at sort of, you know, 6 o'clock the next morning, and went to knock on the door about 7:30, and didn't look too good when he knocked on the door. Not surprised, he had a bit of a growth, and hadn't had a wash, obviously, because he'd been driving all night, which I think put them off somewhat. And you know, had offered a huge sum of money as well. I think they had offered about £50,000 because he thought he was going to get £80,000 from us. He went with us, but the ball wasn't there. It was with his son. His son lived several miles away in Regensburg. We had to negotiate with him. The Sun turned up. There was all sorts of shenanigans where they stole his car key so he couldn't get away. We had to take him away. We then had to fly him to England in order to give him the money first, when we were obviously intending to steal the ball, which is what I mean about him being a bit more astute. So in other words, he was saying, look, I've got to have the cash before you get the ball. So we then had to try and set up the deal where we paid him the cash and got the ball at the same time. So another team had to get sent to Regensburg, get the Sun, get the ball, fly across with it. We're playing for time with the dad, trying obviously to steal the ball, but we're unable to do so because as I say, he was reasonably switched on, so he wasn't going to give us the ball until he got the money. When the ball actually arrived in Blighty, there was a couple of comedic scenes. One was at Heathrow. I had to go and meet him, and I said to my colleague, oh, it looks like it's going to be fine, this. It doesn't look like there's going to be too many problems. And this poor little fat German footballer then came round the corner, absolutely surrounded by German media, Italian media, English media, Germany shouting, "Why are you giving England the ball back?" The English Sun newspaper saying, "Why have you stolen Jeffers' ball?" And he was really sweaty and really very angry about it all and very concerned. We then had to get him away from the airport. We then got followed by motorbikes who were trying to find out where he was going. A team had been sent to Stansted Airport and had been told that when his son arrives, just to steal the ball at all costs. Similar sort of instructions to us, but the son of the footballer, if you see what I mean, had brought a fake ball, which was almost like a cartoon. It was in a bag with arrows pointing towards saying football, and he had the proper ball hidden in his rucksack on his back. Two Sun reporters had been told just to basically get the ball at all costs at Stansted. So they'd booked a flight to, with various grandmothers to Jersey to get airside so they could see this guy. And obviously seeing the guy with a ball in the bag with two Daily Mirror reporters, then jumped on him and got into an unseemly melee in a fight on the floor of Stansted arrivals, trying to get this ball, and then thought they'd got the ball, and then they got arrested. And got taken away and got escorted. But we knew then that the Sun were there and there were other people outside, so then we had to hire a helicopter in order to get away with the ball, so that they couldn't follow us. But the Sun team, the other reporter, then found out we'd hired a helicopter, so they hired another helicopter. And there were two helicopters waiting on the helipad at Stansted to carry the little German with a ball had been stolen and the real ball in his rucksack. Our reporter and photographer, and then there was the Sun, almost like a sort of Keystone Cops type thing, waiting to follow that helicopter. And the Sun reporter told me afterwards that all he wanted to do was say follow that helicopter. He wasn't really bothered about getting the ball. That would have been his life. That would have been his lifetime ambition fulfilled, to simply say follow that helicopter. So our photographer very cunningly, actually, the guy, and I still haven't discovered what the guy is, what you call the guy who's got the things for takeoff. Said to the guy who does the things for takeoff, or whatever he may be called, there's 50 quid, can you just make sure that that helicopter doesn't take off in time when we depart? So our helicopter took off with the ball, and the guy was like this, and some guy was saying, follow that helicopter. Follow that helicopter, and he was saying, I can't, the guy, you know, I've got to get the go-ahead. So our helicopter disappeared, and then he had to get off, which I thought was tragic, really, because, you know, they could have just taken him up for a ride, but they never did. Meanwhile, we'd gone to the bank to give him the £80,000, and what I was saying to you about witnessing things and the importance of seeing it for yourself, tragically, the bank manager had a real sort of passing resemblance to Adolf Hitler, which obviously wasn't his fault, but given the Teutonic sort of aspect, the Germanic aspect to this particular deal was a bit unfortunate. And we're in a tiny room, which I think was his broom cupboard in Holborn, and we all sort of shuffled in like Peter Sellers waiting to fart in the lift, and we all stood round, and then he got all this money out, and I'd never seen, obviously, not surprisingly, I'd never actually seen £80,000 in cash. And it was absolutely extraordinary sight. It was like glistening like a movie, you know, like sort of like gold light all shone around it, you know, as he opened this bag. And bizarrely, the German footballer didn't want to pay tax on it, which I thought was admirable, and you know, exactly what one would expect of a footballer. So you had these two guys who we called Tweedledum and Tweedledee, who both had a sort of passing resemblance to David Hasselhoff. And actually dressed like him as well, which was a bit disconcerting. I thought they were going to do some sort of song for the Berlin Wall or something. This money appeared, and it was in a little bag, and they wanted to take it directly to Heathrow as hand luggage so they could get it on the plane so they didn't have to pay tax on it. They had a fight basically in this tiny room with this guy who looked like Adolf Hitler, with all the money on the table, with the German footballer about how much they were going to get for taking it back to Germany, basically. I could just about follow in German. And it was really, there wasn't much room to have a fight with two David Hasselhoff lookalikes and a small bank manager who looks like Adolf Hitler and £80,000. It was quite a difficult sort of fit, really. So they ended up sort of pulling each other's jacket off and having a bit of a set to before the money was finally delivered. And the great denouement to this story, we got the ball and we got a picture of him with the ball, and we paid the other sort. Well, there's two denouement, if one can have two denouement, which is quite difficult to say. One is the fact that Jeff Hurst was getting paid £10,000 a day just to be available for the picture by the Sun. So he got £30,000 a day from the Sun for 3 days. Then he realised we had the ball, which obviously was going to be difficult because the whole idea was to give him the ball. So we then had to pay him 10 grand for 1 day to be pictured with a ball. So we'd paid at that juncture £90,000 for that picture, which I always find slightly staggering. But so he got £40,000 for basically being Jeff Hurst, which I think is a nice job if you can get it. We got a picture of him with a ball. You know, everybody was very happy because it was on the front page the next day, obviously, as you would expect. But about 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, not that long afterwards, it was maybe a little while afterwards, they did this thing on Channel 4 where they basically colorised the 1966 World Cup final. So obviously it's in black and white, and they'd got some expert or other to, you know, to introduce colour to the World Cup final. So you know, I was watching it, and the ball which I'd seen, I remember thinking to myself, it could really be anybody's. It could be anybody's ball. It looked like a sort of mitre ball that I'd had as a kid, and I was thinking, how can you verify that is Jeff Hurst's ball? Because nobody had asked that question. We just basically accepted this guy's version of events, the one who got £90,000. And then they all came out, and it was like, I'm not exaggerating, it was like the Harlem Globetrotters. There were so many orange balls bouncing around this pitch. I suddenly realised that actually we could have paid £90,000 for pretty much any one of those balls, if indeed it was from the '66 World Cup final, or another ball which he just decided to flog us for 90 grand, and there was absolutely no way verifying all that blood, sweat and tears and £90,000 was actually being paid for Jeff Hurst's ball. So that was the kind of pièce de résistance at the end of it all. Yeah, and that's the biggest buy that I've ever done, and probably the biggest buy I'll ever do. And was quite a good laugh. It was quite good fun, that one. Yeah.
Yeah, we got a question coming from Twitter from Luke Parkinson. He's asked, what was better, reporting on the Olympics or the World Cup?
Personally, I can answer that very quickly. I enjoy Olympics much more. I think the Olympics, what I was saying to you about the 100 metres final, that's the best sporting moment I think I've ever witnessed. You have the added thing, and it's stating the obvious, isn't it? The only time England have done well in my lifetime is the 96 Euros, really, to be honest with you. I mean, I've had some exciting moments following England. Don't get me wrong, and I've loved it. I love football, and I play football, and I've always loved football, so I really love doing it. But I just find the Olympics, the people are much more accessible. The athletes have got a kind of bit of a different attitude towards it. When you see the families, with Chris Hoy, for example, when he won his 6th gold medal, there was some great footage of his mum and dad bouncing up and down. And it was very, very funny on TV, but it also worked as stills because his mum couldn't bear to watch, you know, because I don't know if you remember, as he came around the bend, there was this German guy ahead of him, and the German guy looked like he was going to win, to be honest. And as they came off the final bend, he just got past him. Then he just flew past the line and won. And it was so tense, obviously, for his mum and dad. And what you find is when you go and see them in those moments afterwards, they're in such a golden glow that they just tell you everything, you know. So you find about his first bike. You find out about the fact he first went to little clubs when he was 6. You know, they get out pictures of him when he was 6. They tell you about you get his life story in about 15 minutes flat because they're so excited and so, you know, as one would expect, so kind of full of that moment where he's achieved his lifetime goal. And the other thing about the Olympics is, in my opinion, I mean, I can't imagine what it's like winning the World Cup, don't get me wrong, and I thought about it a lot watching the Germans. I thought the German reaction kind of changed how people saw Germany in a strange way. You know, the way they celebrated and the fact the kids came on, and yeah, you know, that sort of doer image that you've got of Germans. I love Germany, and that's part of the reason I studied German. And I thought that when they won the World Cup, kind of the image of Germany was exploded in that moment. But I found that quite Olympian in a way, because when you meet people who've won an Olympic medal and they've just won it, because they've been working so hard, you know, as individuals to achieve that, I can't imagine what that's like. It must just be the most incredible feeling you can have without sort of, you know, aid of some other hallucinogenic.
Sport as well.
Exactly. And for many of them, for Chris Hoy, for cyclists, swimmers is another classic example where Rebecca Adlington, we talked to her, and she's such a really wonderful, engaging character when she won our medals in Beijing, and she was talking about buying Jimmy Choo's shoes, and she was just such a natural, really. And I find many of them are like that. I think maybe because of the sacrifices they've had to make and the fact that they aren't earning £300,000 a week. And that's no disrespect to footballers, that's just the way football is, but they've just got a different attitude towards it, you know? And I think that's what makes it so special doing the Olympics, really. And I have to say, in the context of London, going back to do the Paralympics was something else. I mean, it was like, you know, it was like London 2012 on crack doing the Paralympics. It was just some of the things that, there was a guy from Italy who was doing the cycling, and he was literally lying flat on his back, having had his legs removed in a racing car accident. And he was so the only way you could interview him, it was really bizarre, was him lying flat on his back, and there was like people looking down a well, sort of talking to him like this. And he's a guy looking at you, and he hasn't got, you know, he's lost both his legs at roundabout thigh level, and he's looking up and telling you what a lucky man he is and how lucky he is, how amazing he feels having achieved this. And I tell you what, I defy anybody with any human spirit whatsoever not to be just tremendously moved by that, really. Certainly I was. I get quite emotional thinking about it now. And it was just the fact that he'd overcome so much in order to be in that position. And he just won a gold medal, which was like his lifetime goal, if one can put it that way, having been a racing driver and having lost both his legs. And he's still telling you about how lucky he is, you know. And there were so many stories of that nature. His was the most incredible story, I think. But things like that you just never forget, you know. You just never forget. You never forget him, and you never forget kind of what he's been through and how he's come out the other side in order to achieve that. And that was the thing that I took from the Paralympics in particular. It really changed my attitude completely. I think, actually, I hope anyway, that it changed everybody's attitude towards people like that. But that, to see someone's close up like that, you know, I was saying about Bradley Wiggins, I was actually probably as excited to meet that guy as I was to meet Bradley Wiggins, even though Bradley Wiggins is an all-time hero, because he was just such an extraordinary human being. That's the only way I can describe it.
So just there's no examples of something similar in the football world, where you've heard a story about something really inspiring the footballer's done, or their journey?
That's a bit more of a struggle, actually. I mean, I've got a real soft spot for Gascoigne because he's from my hometown, and I interviewed him when he was 19, and he was so extraordinarily talented, and to be close to that was quite something. And I had I saw him because he's from my hometown. I knew him, I'd heard about him. I went to see him when he was playing, and then to see him on a world stage, if you see what I mean, and bizarrely as a journalist to cover some of his games. That was an unusual experience. And that sounds a strange thing because of everybody's perception about Paul Gascoigne now. Everybody sees him completely differently now. But actually, when he was at his peak, was the best I think, in my opinion, was the best footballer just about on the planet. And it was quite extraordinary because I knew where he came from to what he achieved. And that was God's gift, actually. That was a natural gift that he had. But it was amazing to see that. Just, I'm talking about purely in sporting terms, to see that journey from very humble roots, from my hometown, to become a superstar. That was amazing. And I still, as a sportsman, I've got every admiration for him. It's just desperately sad what's happened to him, you know, because he couldn't handle that, everything that went with it, the circus that went with it, you know, being a superstar. Because he then became one of the most famous people on earth, didn't he? It wasn't just about the sporting achievement. So that was quite, yeah, it was interesting to see that, but not, and inspiring in many ways, but not as inspiring in the same way as the Olympians.
Yeah.
Hi, I was just wondering about the wire that you talked about before. Is that something that happens less and less now?
It is in terms of the money, yeah. It is in terms of the money, without a doubt. I think, well, that became a bit of a. It was Piers Morgan who was in charge. He was determined to get the ball because he thought it was a fantastic story, which it was, actually. It was. And in those situations, there's only one thing that counts, and that is actually getting what we believe to be Jeff Hurst's ball. So I guess it might have even potentially gone higher than that. But to answer your question, would that happen tomorrow? It might do in certain situations, it might do. But it's less likely to, and the most difficult thing actually is making a judgment on what something is worth. Yeah. Because obviously you get lots of people who ring up who think they're going to get life-changing amounts of money, who've got a story which is probably worth about £12.50, and then you get other people who have got extraordinary stories who obviously may not be aware of the fact that, you know, that they are extraordinary stories, and it's very, that's the most difficult part of the job in a way. And if it disappeared tomorrow, I wouldn't feel desperately sad about it, paying for stories. But one has to accept it's a business, it's an industry, and people, you know, more and more because of what we're just describing, do have this notion that, you know, it's easy to become famous is one of the kind of bugbears of our time, I would argue, and also people think it's easy money and can be made whether the story is worth that or not, and that's you know, that's the real difficulty.
Would you say it's quite disheartening to be working on a big story and then know that everyone's already seen it online but you can't publish it till the next day?
I think the challenge for every reporter is to say something new. And that's why I ask people about reading newspapers, because if you're a journalist and you want to be a journalist or a reporter and you don't read newspapers, how do you know if it's new, first and foremost? So that's why it's so important to, you know, to do that. Whether you do that online, whether you buy them as I do, physically read them, because I quite enjoy doing that. However you do it, you've just got to be aware of that. That was much more of a pertinent argument. The first time I became aware of that was at Beijing, I must admit, because the Telegraph had about 20 people there doing online. There was literally a table full of them, and they had an equestrian correspondent, an athletics correspondent, they had Bruff Scott doing the horse race, and they had all these specialist people who were just writing for online. And I was thinking, how do you do something different? And that is a real challenge, actually. And I think the answer to your question, for what it's worth, is there are times where you can't do a great deal differently, because obviously, you know, for example, the 100 metres, the fastest man on earth, is always going to be the fastest man on earth. That is always going to be the story to a certain extent, and all you can bring to it is your personal input to a degree, and to try and do it differently, to try and move the story on, and, you know, in simple terms, if you can, try and do exclusive material in the newspaper in order that people buy it. But it's a very, very difficult argument, and maybe, you know, maybe that's why newspapers won't exist within a generation, potentially.
You said you speak German. How important is it for a journalist to know a different language?
It's useful. I mean, the only reason I mentioned that was the context of the stories. If you go and work for newspapers and you've got an interest, I don't know, you might speak Swahili for all I know, you know, be fluent in Italian or whatever it is, then for goodness sake, you know, let people know where you work that is the case, because you've got a skill which you can use. It means you'll go to Italy, it means you'll go and speak to people who are Italian. You know, the guy who had no legs was an Italian guy who won the gold medal, so obviously you would have been at a great advantage in that situation. Any skill that you've got, you might love sport, you might love politics, you might love fashion, you might love, you know, whatever floats your boat. The chances are, if you're writing about that and you've got a passion for it, that's going to come through in the writing, isn't it? I would have thought. So the reason I mention that is, if you have got a skill, if you're bilingual, or you've studied a language or anything, if you've got anything that floats your boat that you really want to write about, then let people know, because the chances are you're going to bring something to the party which maybe other people haven't got. And that's really important, actually, when you know, writing about anything pretty much. But I think if you love something and you enjoy it and you can bring that passion to your writing, then that's got to be an advantage, I would have thought. Yeah? Absolutely, yeah, unequivocally. I mean, you've got to... The thing I was saying to you about moving images, I think that's really crucial, and I'm much more aware of it now. There was a guy who was doing purely video at the World Cup, who I worked alongside, a guy called Dave Tarbox, and things like, there was an Irish guy, I mean, literally, I'm not exaggerating, there was an Irish guy who'd gone to Brazil because his girlfriend had dumped him, who just proceeded to get inebriated every single night of the World Cup, as far as one could tell, and got dressed up as a Brazilian dancer, complete with thong, coconuts, and a wig. Which, you know, fair play to the lad, you've got to have a hobby. So Dave Tarbuck's went out and videoed him, and I can't remember what he called him. He called him something like, what was it, the fella in the favela, I think it was. It was something like that. And it was really, I have to say, it was really, really funny. I mean, it was really funny. All he was doing was dancing with coconuts on. And, you know, jigging on a table and getting drunk with all these Brazilian girls. And what was really funny, he kept on going up to these Brazilian girls and asking for a kiss, and they were all kind of knocking him back. Because he was such a sight, as you would imagine, with coconuts, a wig and a thong. I can't remember where he was from. I did speak to him. He was from Derry or somewhere, I think. Now, to be honest with you, when I first started doing the job, that I would have walked past him. I probably would have laughed, you know, shook his hand and got a picture with, you know, and that would have been it. It wouldn't have been a story. But that was a story because we've got this really funny footage of him dancing and jigging and basically getting drunk as an Irishman, doing a very good impersonation of a drunken Irishman. That went online, and again, you know, just literally like tens of thousands of people were watching, you know, the fella in the favela getting drunk in Brazil. And there was quite a funny story behind it. Well, I'm saying funny, you know what I mean. The footage was really funny, and there's quite a sad story behind it because his girlfriend had dumped him, they'd been engaged, and he'd moved, and he went to find a new life in Brazil. So, I mean, genuinely, something which you would just pass in the street, you wouldn't think was a story. Got some footage of it. The footage really worked, and he went on radio the next day. He was on TV in Ireland. They did TV interviews with him and stuff, as a result of the video. Now, the reason I mention that is just that is such an online phenomenon. Do you know what I mean? That worked purely because he was online. Lots of people went to online to see it. Wouldn't have got in the paper well, I think he got in the Irish edition, but you know what I mean. An Irishman getting drunk in a favela is not really an agenda-setting Pulitzer Prize winner, let's be fair. It would have been a story had he not been getting drunk in a favela. But because of the images, because of the visual, you know, because of the visual comedy of the video, that got online, became a story. He went on TV, and you know, and I had to write some words on it, and I rang him and interviewed him when he'd recovered the next day, and he was going to be out the next night and do exactly the same thing. Now, that, as I say, that is kind of how it works, and that's the challenge of trying to read what's going to work online and what's going to work in the newspaper, because it's a completely different audience, to be honest. All you people are getting your stories online, I think. Well, judging by the question I asked at the beginning, I can't remember, was there 3 people who bought a newspaper? Everybody else had read online. So this is where you're getting your information, isn't it, essentially? My generation buys newspapers, and that's the difference, and that's what you've got to work out, really. You've got to work out which is the best audience for the material. And it's a real challenge, I would say.
I was just wondering, you've covered a lot of the North East in your career. Do you think that's an area which is underrepresented in the media?
I don't know. I mean, I think I do joke about certain things being London-centric, you know, like snow falls in London and it's 5 pages in the Daily Mail, and will we survive the winter, sort of thing. While you know 600 people have died in the northeast from the fall in temperatures, etc., etc. I'm exaggerating, but you know what I'm saying. There is a London-centric element to the media inevitably, because politics is there, entertainment is there, and all of that. I don't think you could say the northeast is underrepresented. I think that would be a touch unfair. I think one just has to be aware. The difficult thing is being aware of what makes a national story in the northeast, in Leeds, in Devon, in Timbuktu, and what's not going to be of interest to people in Southampton if it's happened in Morpeth. Obviously, one has to make a judgment on an individual basis as to whether it works or not, and that is difficult, actually.
I want to ask 2 things really, so they're the opposite. One is, what story have you worked on that's really stayed with you? Is the Fritzl one? And secondly, is there a story you've done that you felt really uncomfortable and thought, I should never have done that?
Oh, goodness me. 2 very good questions. It's weird how it works. Stories do, I think, stay with you for different reasons. For example, I did a story last year on this really tragic situation where there'd been a U-turn in government policy on operations for kids who were suffering from a particular disease, which meant that the struggle to walk And it was a very, very complicated argument as to why the funding had been taken away. Essentially, many parents believed that this treatment did help your kids to walk, and the government had made a decision that they were going to take it away. And as ever with these things, sometimes you get a big issue like that, which is very complicated, very difficult to explain to readers, but then you get one child who encapsulates it. And there was this one child who was due to go in for the operation, was actually at the hospital. The government did a U-turn on the policy, and he was refused his operation, which was due to take place the next week. So it really encapsulated that issue, if you see what I mean. The arguments behind it were very complicated, but the mother was a brilliant interviewee and a brilliant advocate of this particular treatment. So, you know, obviously did the interview, did the story, it appeared online, and he needed £20,000 to have this operation privately. This is what the mum had decided, kind of because of the government U-turn on the policy. And that money was raised, I think, within about 14 days. Mirror Readers gave £9,000 to get the first operation done. This businessman read the story and gave her another £6,000 to get the second operation done, and she still raised money for the physio and all that sort of thing. The reason that stayed with me was because there was a number of different aspects to it. One is the power of just being able to do something good. There are so many stories about, you know, a myriad of different things that we do wrong, particularly at the moment. And one of the most difficult aspects actually of working in the media at the moment is just the negativity just surrounding the job, full stop. So it was really nice to do a job where actually, you know, the power of that, it was online and it was in the newspaper, but the power of that had really made it work. So this kid had his operation, he could walk again, he is doing physio, the operation did work. It highlighted the fragility of the government U-turn. I don't know enough about it. I'm not an expert in this field to make some sort of judgment on whether this particular treatment does work all the time or whether it doesn't. But the government decided they were going to change the rules a little bit. And this mum also was telling me that because of online and what this lady was saying about the power of online actually came to the fore, because there were people who were getting in touch from America, Australia, Vietnam, who'd never heard of the treatment, whose children had the same problem, so we're then going to get informed about the treatment. So there was kind of a lot of different aspects to it. So that really stayed with me, really simply because all we done is done his story and made something change. And really, you know, I felt very pleased to be even a tiny part of that. In terms of regrets about stories, it's difficult. I was saying to Nigel that I did a story yesterday about the Morecambe Bay inquiry, which is going to be a press conference tomorrow. That's why I couldn't come tomorrow, because there's a big press conference on this NHS. There's no two ways about it. Disaster in terms of treatment of children in a neonatal unit in Morecambe Bay, and it's been ongoing for a long time. Big report tomorrow. 2 stories in the Sunday newspapers, basically, you know, saying that midwives weren't talking to consultants. That led to delays in terms of treating babies who had problems when they were born, and a number of babies have died as a result of that. You can't imagine a worse scenario, really. Awful story. And I got a briefing from the guy who's going to produce the report, and I was just saying to Nigel, I felt that maybe it wasn't quite right. So I spoke to the sub-editor who rang me about the headline, and I wasn't sure about the headline, wasn't sure about the story. I'd written 800 words and I got knocked down to literally 12 paragraphs, which was part of the problem, because obviously you're then putting all this information about a very complex issue into a lesser story, if one can put it that way. And I was really concerned about getting that wrong. I was really concerned because of the subject matter. So I still have times like that. And the other thing you have to be aware of, the thing I'd say about the internet is the immediacy of it. Is the fact that, you know, I don't know, Madonna is a classic example, isn't it? Falls on her arse, you know, God love her. I don't want to laugh at Madonna, obviously, not just yet. But some of the stuff online, some of the stuff on the internet, my favourite was Like a Curtain dropped for the very first time. I thought that was really good. And that was done by about 10:20. I said, I took my hat off to whoever did that. But there is a serious side to it as well, where if you are going to work in online, you've got to be so acutely aware of the fact that when it appears, that's it. The reason I had a sleepless night about the story that I did yesterday was I was concerned the headline was going to be right on it, that it was going to be wrong. And one of the things that I can't stress enough, no matter what the medium, whether it's newspapers, whether it's online, but particularly online, is that once it's out there and it's published, there ain't any going back. And if it's your name that's on it and it's wrong, believe me, you're the one who gets the comeback. And it is worth bearing that in mind, especially with online journalism, I think.
The bad news is we're running out of time. The good news is I don't think Jeremy's any mad panic to get away. So if anyone wants to fire any sort of one-to-one questions with him afterwards, we're going to at least grab a coffee. Just to say a couple of things. Firstly, obviously, thanks very much for coming here. There's a couple of points I would take from that, right? Firstly, we can have all the technology in the world, right? Okay, but what Jeremy was saying, right? The whole point about going into journalism is to go out and witness history actually happening, okay? And the other thing I'd like to say is I thought the story about the World Cup football, which I've never heard before, I think that's absolutely brilliant. I actually think you could make a comedy out of that. I think you can make a 1 hour
it has crossed my mind, I have to say.
Comedy out of that.
Bit of script writing.
Go down brilliantly. Just before we close, I've been asked to say that Mike Wooldridge is pretty much on more or less straight off the back of us here, which is one of the reasons why we're under pressure for time. We're going to take a sort of 10-minute break. And again, you're more than welcome to have a quick chat with Jeremy. But otherwise, I'd just like you to show your appreciation.
Thank you.